You are listening to the Body Charge podcast, and I'm your host, Sandy Sanderson. Welcome to the Body Charge podcast. Today's topic is DNA epigenetics in addiction susceptibility. Why do some people become addicted to substances very easily, whilst others don't? Why do some people need more nutritional support than others, given the same environmental conditions and diet? The answer could be in the DNA sequences and their epigenetic settings. My special guest today is Elwin Robinson, the founder of Genetic Insights, a program that allows people to upload their raw DNA data from an Ancestry service for a unique genetic profile and assessment describing health risks, nutritional requirements, allergies and intolerances, sensitivities, and even personality traits. So welcome aboard, Elwin. Lovely to have you on the Body Charge podcast.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, I think of the body as a little bit of a computer, but we're an organic computer, aren't we? And we have programs that sit in the DNA. And the DNA gets a lot more complex than that. The sequences, to me, in my mind, I've conjured up this kind of analogy with a washing machine. It has certain settings that can be changed. So there are environmental triggers that then reset the dial on the washing machine, but it's the same DNA, but it changes the way it expresses itself. And so this is the epigenetic response or expression. And I guess we have it in us as humanity because it allows us to change over time to suit changing environmental conditions. So there's a benefit to that. But sometimes we get that setting changed in a very negative way. So can you explain a little bit more? I know I probably covered it quite crudely, but in your words, have I described it correctly, or, do you want to correct me in some way?
No, I think you described it very elegantly. The only thing might be you described it very quickly. So I'm not sure if people have the background knowledge that you do, but I think you were entirely accurate. I could maybe expand on it a little bit that, there's two major factors. And in our program, we do address both of them. So the first is not epigenetic. The first is your genetic blueprint. And so a lot of this is based on what we call snips, which stands for SNP, or single nucleotide polymorphism. So just as you said, Sandy, we can easily look at the basis of what makes us, and I do mean the basis, not the totality, as this genetic code. And so, recently, not that long ago, we fully sequenced the human genome, and a lot of services like 23andMe is famous, and Ancestry, and a bunch of other ones like that. They don't sequence the full genome, but they do quite a decent portion of it, and they do the portion of it that we understand the most, that the most research has been done on. So then a company like ours can look at that information, and especially if they're sophisticated like ours, we can make a bunch of very complicated calculations. We can weight, different things against each other. And then, as you mentioned in my introduction, we can give you a risk score for all kinds of different things. Do you have a risk for, we've reports on hundreds of different diseases. Do you have a higher risk for those? There's also what I call type reports. For instance, famously, a lot of people like our carbohydrate report. Some people are more hunter-gatherer type, meaning that they do well on a low carb, more maybe even close to keto diet. Some people are more a farmer type, we call it, who do very well on even a high carbohydrate, even a simple carbohydrate diet. They're the people who are okay with sugar and, white rice and all that kind of thing. It's no big deal for them. And then there's a lot of people who are in between. So that's the type reports. We have nutrient needs reports, over 60 different nutrients, every amino acid, every type of essential fat, every vitamin, every major mineral. Because, a lot of people try and make this simple. They just say, oh, you're this type or this type. But maybe true when it comes to carbs, but not when it comes to the complexity of nutrition. There's many different variations in that.
Many shades, graduations in between, yes.
Yes, and some things are universally beneficial for almost everyone because of environmental epigenetic factors like magnesium, which obviously you're a huge proponent of.
That's like drinking water. That's really basic.
Indeed. But what surprises me especially, for instance, is how often amino acids, like an increased need for an amino acid, often coupled with an unfortunate deficiency of that amino acid in the person's diet, can lead to major life-changing and life-ruining health issues if left unaddressed. And that's the kind of thing that we wouldn't really think of necessarily. So nutrient needs are really huge. Anyway, I won't carry on listing them, but yeah, we do personality types and all kinds of stuff, and emotional kind of issues and hormones and lab test results. And all of those we can say, do you have an increased risk, or do you have a tendency for higher cortisol? Do you have a tendency for lower cortisol? All of that kind of stuff. But anyway, all of that is only tendencies. So that's the first part of the story. So these SNPs, they mean often what they do is affect a gene, which affects an enzyme. And what an enzyme does is, in very simple terms, it converts one thing into another thing. And so a lot of what these SNPs do is they will speed up or slow down the function of that gene, and therefore enzymes. And so therefore, maybe you have a gene that quickly makes adrenaline, but then slowly breaks down adrenaline. So what's that going to mean? You're probably going to have high adrenaline overall, right? Unless other
Yes, which can
environmental
become
factors.
toxic. It can
Absolutely.
become acidic in the body, and acids break us down. So that if we have a lot of stress all the time and we're pumping a lot of adrenaline and the body can't detox from it properly, that causes an acidic environment, which means that the body is constantly stressed. You don't have a chance to rest and recover and restore the pH. And pH is what allows the blood to flow fluidly around the body, the blood cells to bounce off one another and have enough fluidity to absorb oxygen and nutrients from that plasma environment. And if it becomes too acidic, the cells start to stick together, then we get thickening blood, high blood pressure, a lot of cardiovascular issues, and they're always associated with low magnesium as well. So
Yes.
I have found in my magnesium research that scientists found about 10% of the population pee out excessive amounts of magnesium via the kidneys. So there is a link also, I think, with the epigenetic side of things, is how much are we able to recycle the magnesium or use it more efficiently? Why do some people lose it more? When we're younger, we recycle it much better. When we get older, we have lower magnesium reserves. And it's a bit of chicken and egg, isn't it? The lower the magnesium reserves, the more premature the aging. And the more we age, the more we lose the magnesium. So it's a downward spiral, unless we can change that and spiral it back up again.
Yeah, my opinion on that specific last thing you said is it's thyroid function that's really the crucial determinant. When our thyroid function becomes lower and our metabolism slows down, then we start to excrete more magnesium. And this is something that often gets worse with age, although some people just start off with lower thyroid function, even, from the moment they're born, because again, that genetic risk, and then they might have had it their whole life.
Yes. So if, let's say, one of the parents was in a war, suffered a trauma, they're suffering PTSD, they have children, somehow or other, instructions are passed on that pass on some kind of ill health to the offspring. So there are a lot of scientists, I believe, looking at what we're handing down to our future generations that aren't corrected.
I have a potential explanation for that, because I think the body's always trying to do its best, right? I'm sure you agree. So I think, you mentioned earlier about how adrenaline causes acidity. I do agree, although I think my understanding these days is that the mechanism of that is, your body raises adrenaline because it's trying to increase energy in a lot of cases. So it's by raising adrenaline and cortisol, it's increasing glycolysis, it's increasing gluconeogenesis.
It pushes calcium into the membrane channels of the muscle cells so that you can have a squeeze. So magnesium comes out, calcium goes in, it squeezes. Then in the relaxation phase, the calcium comes out, magnesium goes in and brings water back with it. So that helps inflate and relax the muscle fibers. So that your heart's doing that all the time. In, out, you're breathing in, out, your heart's pumping on, it's going constantly. where the calcium goes in, the magnesium goes out. Well, where we have health problems is when that synergy starts to fail and we get too much calcium in there, creating hardness and stiffness, and not enough magnesium coming back in to relax the system and create fluidity again. So that's related to pH, because the body will resist. It will become more acidic. The more adrenaline, the more it attracts calcium into the cells, because calcium is used as an alkalizing agent. So the body's, as you said, always trying to get to balance, trying to balance that pH. And if there's not enough alkalizers in the food, if the body's genetics are such that it can't detox properly from wastes, it can't get rid of the acidity, then that starts to accumulate too much free calcium and calcium settling in the soft tissue and joints. So
I 100% agree with that. I'm very familiar with that philosophy. The only thing I'd say is, I used to kind of follow that and take a lot of alkalizing agents and eating alkaline foods and stuff, and it didn't really resolve anything for me. And what I discovered is that the cause of the excess acidity is actually that the true most efficient form of energy generation, the oxidative phosphorylation, is not taking place. So the body is doing too much glycolysis, which is a less efficient way of creating energy out of glucose. And the
yes,
the byproduct or the end product of the best form of energy creation creates water and CO2. And the CO2 helps transport more oxygen into the cells, which creates this virtuous cycle. When the body is in more a state of glycolysis, then it is not producing the energy very efficiently. But the other problem is that the byproducts are lactic acid,
yes,
right?
more.
Much more lactic acid. And so resolving that fundamental issue to me was much more impactful than just alkalizing.
You hit the nail on the head, because you need about 26 magnesium molecules to turn one sucrose molecule into energy. So people that are consuming a lot of sugar are also using up and wasting a lot of the magnesium reserves. It's like a seesaw effect. So the lower the magnesium, the higher the sugar sensitivity. And there's a very strong relationship between diabetes and chronically low levels of magnesium.
Mm. And so for me, like getting thyroid function working better was the most important thing, because as
Yes.
thyroid starts working better, the body starts making energy more efficiently. It starts creating more CO2 and water as a byproduct rather than lactic acid. And then all those problems are resolved, and I didn't need to, focus on alkalizing agent anymore. And my magnesium levels went up. My red blood cell magnesium levels, suddenly with less supplementation, my magnesium was higher because, as you just said, it wasn't being wasted in this inefficient methods of energy production.
Yes. So getting back to the genetics of things,
Yes.
I find a lot of health issues are related to your ability to digest and absorb, to even get the nutrients out of the food. So are you
Hmm.
able to, with your system, be able to find the likelihood where there's would we say there's a genetic flaw or a mutation that may cause that to happen? Like I know someone who has Leiden factor 5, for instance, that is a gene mutation in the ability to coagulate the blood. So they easily form blood clots a lot earlier. So they're 8 times more likely to form blood clots compared to people who don't have that mutated gene.
Yeah,
So,
I'd say there's not just one factor, there's many. And that is one of the things that separates our system out from other people's. So a lot of what other people are doing is something that is so simple that it could really even be done manually by a low-skilled worker. All they're doing is they're looking at the code, they're picking out a snip, and they're saying, this snip means this about you. What we do is we actually have an engine developed and maintained by several dozen full-time AI engineers and several dozen full-time research scientists that actually takes thousands and sometimes millions of different snips, weighs them all against each other, and then comes out with both a risk score and recommendations, weighing them all up against each other. So just to explain that difference compared to what your audience may have come across before, we don't just say, oh, you have this one SNP, you have this one variant, and therefore you're more likely to have this problem. We actually weigh a lot of things up before we come to any kind of conclusions. And so to answer your main question about digestion, yeah, there's lots of different things that can impact
It's
digestion.
thyroid again.
Well, it definitely can be thyroid. I wasn't going to go there though. There's some obvious stuff like how much stomach acid do you produce? That's something that will be influenced by your genetics. How much bile do you produce? That's something that will be influenced by your genetics. How likely are you to have cholestasis, which is where the bile starts to thicken up and get stuck? That's something that, first of all, you can have a genetic tendency towards, and we have a report for that. But also, of course, certain nutritional deficiencies, like, for instance, a choline deficiency, can cause that cholestasis. So that's something that is very important. And even a magnesium deficiency can lead to cholestasis, right? Because of lack of, what's the word, permeability of the biliary ducts.
Just your electrolyte balance, basically.
Yeah, so there's that. Allergies and intolerances can absolutely cause major digestive issues because the important thing to understand is that what an allergy and intolerance is means that your immune system is treating this constituent component, whatever we want to call it, as if it were a poison or as if it were a foreign invader. And so obviously, toxins can have a big impact on digestive health, like we talked about. Like if you have high levels of lead, if you have high levels of mycotoxins, if you have high levels of glyphosate, all these kind of things will negatively impact digestion because they're, creating inflammation. They're often interfering with the processes of digestion. They may be
and gut
interfering
health,
with nutrients.
the microbiome.
Yep, absolutely. They could be destroying the microbiome. They're encouraging the overgrowth of pathogenic organisms, which is especially bad in, the small intestine. We're discovering more and more
Can
these
I just
days.
interrupt you for a minute? Your camera seems to have frozen. Can you give it a jiggle or turn it off and on?
Yeah, I'll turn it off and on, sure.
Yeah. Oh,
How's
you're back
that?
again.
Good. I think what it is with Zoom, for some
Yeah.
reason, when you do a expression,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. I don't use Zoom. Do you want me to do it again,
No,
or
no,
is
no.
that okay?
Keep going. Yep, we'll
Okay.
keep going. That's fine.
So that's just a few examples, but there are many, many, many ways that your genetics can impact your digestion. And it's very important to understand those things about yourself. A lot of people do a lot of arguing online about what the best diet is, right? We already touched upon one of them. Are carbohydrates good? Are they bad? Are fats good? Are they bad? Are saturated fats good? Are they bad? And so there are very adamant and ardent supporters on all sides, all of whom claim miraculous results, and
One
rather than
t-shirt,
trying to
one
work
one t-shirt doesn't fit all though. And we find that again and again.
exactly.
That's why we have groups out there and forums and people that find each other that have a similar digestive system. They probably have a lot of similar genes, wouldn't you say?
Yes, exactly. And that's something that we can give clues for. For instance, if I see someone and I can see that they do poorly with carbohydrates and they do very well with proteins and saturated fat, I'm like, you're probably someone who's going to do better on like a high fat, more animal based diet. And if I see someone who's the opposite, I'll say you're definitely going to be someone who does better on a more carbohydrate plant based diet. All other factors being equal, as you said. Now, obviously, despite your genetics, if you have a candida overgrowth or whatever, then probably still simple carbs are not going to agree with you. And if you have cholestasis, then still fats are not going to agree with you, despite your genetics. There
Yes.
are also the environmental factors.
You can get a lot of downstream problems. So, for instance, someone who has a slow digestive system can develop SIBO as well. So,
Yes.
Intuitively you would say, we'll just eat more water and fiber and flush it through, but then it gets stuck in the small intestine and feeds the bad bacteria there. So
Yeah.
they have lots of problems from many different angles, which are a little bit more complex to solve than just here's your genetics. It's a guideline, isn't it? It's a good guide. But it's like
Yeah.
branches of a tree. So we're looking at the trunk, but we need to follow the individual branches out to where that individual actually is. And
Yes.
probably peel away one layer at a time, some of the things that we may be influencing that overall health. For instance, to give you an example, I've found the vast majority of problems, health problems that stem from chronic stress or a trauma are magnesium related. So simply by supplying enough magnesium, a lot of the issues are alleviated, leaving over the elements that are easier to see, because it's not then so complex anymore. The different issues affecting the overall health are simplified. If you take away, have you drunk enough water? Do you drink enough water? Do you get enough electrolytes? Do you get enough magnesium? If you cover the basics, do you get enough sunshine and fresh air? You know, if you just cover the basic lifestyle aspects that we all need that are very fundamental, becomes a lot easier then to tease out what may be left over to address.
Yeah. Although I have to say, having dealt with a lot of difficult clients, like there are people to whom all of that makes them feel worse. There are people who exercise makes them feel worse. There's people whom sunlight makes them feel worse. There's people whom vegetables make them feel worse. So, you know, we have to meet each person where they're at, as you were saying.
To find the balance. Yeah.
And to go back to what you were saying before about genetics, yeah, absolutely. This, I do not advocate for a test your genetics and then do everything based on that. To me, it is exactly as you said it perfectly. You said it's like the trunk of the tree. That's absolutely how I treat it. I treat it as the essential first step is to find your genetic blueprint, but it's definitely not the only step. You know, I have my own 7-step system that very short, you know, very concisely, it comprises of genetic blueprint, nutrient deficiencies, toxic excesses, hormonal and neurochemical imbalances, lifestyle changes, chronic infections like SIBO that you mentioned, and then emotional and psychological issues,
yes,
you know,
which cause stress.
yeah, and they're all interrelated, of course, but
yeah.
those are like my checklist. Like, you know, all of these things have to be looked at whenever someone's struggling to resolve something, and the obvious simple advice is not working, as we were saying, as happens sometimes. But so I'm not saying that genetics are the be all and end all, but I'm saying if you're trying to look at the others, like, you know, a lot of functional medicine people, for instance, they start with looking at like SIBO and digestive health and stuff. But to me, that's skipping ahead to step 6, you know, like it's not a bad thing to do. It's just getting ahead of yourself. What about the basics? Because as you said, you know, a lot of the time these problems are caused by just slow peristalsis, the digestive system not moving quickly enough. Well, why is that? Could be a hormone imbalance, could be lack of thyroid or progesterone, something like that. And it could be something even more simple. It could just be a lack of magnesium or a lack of vitamin B1 or a lack of choline because of the liver, you know, like so. Or it could be an excess of some kind of toxin, like mycotoxins, for instance, can cause that slowing down of peristalsis. So, like, it's always very important to go back to the root first, in my opinion.
Yes, yes. It's like doing a puzzle, isn't it? You've got to sort your pieces out and then see where they fit.
Yeah, and you know, don't do the advanced stuff first. That's my opinion on it, like and my experience, and that works very well for me.
So your system is a bit like a roadmap, isn't it? So here's your roadmap, so you can generally see where you want to go. You have an idea of where to head, because you know health and life is a 3D 360-degree circle. Which direction do you choose to go in to try and solve the problem? Well, you know, we could start with, you know, square one, pull out your roadmap and see where you want to go theoretically.
Mm-hmm.
And then start moving to the next steps.
Yeah, and I call it a checklist. I mean, you may not. This is the amazing thing. Because I often see very difficult people who've tried everything, but sometimes I see people, we look at their genetic reports, it tells them that they have deficiency of a few nutrients that are harmless. So what do I mean by that? If a test tells me that the person has a genetic tendency for low iron or low vitamin D, I don't just tell them to take it, because you can also have too much iron or vitamin D, right?
Absolutely.
I want them to test. But if their genetics tell me that they have low levels of something harmless, like magnesium, or you know, an amino acid like glycine or something like that, or you know, lysine or whatever, I'm like, just take it and see. And yeah, exactly. And I'm actually amazed how often something totally simple like an amino acid, a vitamin, or a mineral transforms someone's life. But I don't then start thinking, oh, I had a guy, for instance, who actually he was kind enough to film a video testimonial for me soon, which will be out on my YouTube channel soon. And he had suffered from anxiety all his life. We talked about anxiety, 40 years. He tried everything. He said he'd spent over £250,000, which I think is over $500,000 Australian dollars on therapy. He'd been to retreats. He'd done spiritual practices. He'd done ayahuasca. He'd done this, that, and the other. He'd done everything, both mainstream and alternative, that everyone says will help. None of it made any difference. I looked at his genetics and I saw he had an increased need for glycine and proline, and he had a
Which helps
tendency
you
for low.
sleep. He probably wasn't getting good sleep.
It helps you sleep. It helps you relax. It's glycine can take the place as GABA of being a calming
Yes.
neurotransmitter, and he also had a genetic tendency to low DHT. And low DHT is a type of testosterone that is a strong GABA agonist. So again, it was GABA. And I'm like,
Pushing
no
the
wonder.
adrenaline out.
Yeah. So when you don't have enough GABA, you have too much adrenaline, because they're antithetical, antagonistic. So just doing those simple things, just a couple of nutrients and a couple of herbs, solve these problems you hadn't been able to do for 40 years. Now, what I'm not going to do is go, wow, that combination of nutrients and herbs will help everyone with anxiety, because they may not, right? I may meet another person who's had chronic anxiety and that will make no difference.
Can't put them all in the same box.
Exactly.
Before we finish up, because we're nearly at the end, can you tie this in with addiction tendencies? So
yes.
People are now very much addicted. Well, there's a group in society that are very easily addicted to alcohol and drugs, and there's other things, gambling, all sorts of addicted even to adrenaline. We were talking about the high risk sports, taking risky ventures. These are all addictions. People find that they're even though they want to stop or they don't want to be doing it, they find an irresistible urge, and they just let go to the system rather than being able to control that urge. Is that genetically related?
Yes, there is a strong genetic component to it. Of course, there is also a strong, nurture and environmental component to it, but there's a very much underestimated. Funnily enough, literally an hour before this, I was recording a podcast of someone who, only talks about addictions, and I went into it in detail there. I also have a 2-hour video on addictions on my YouTube channel, so if people want a more in-depth guide.
It's a big topic. Yeah.
Yeah, but just in a nutshell, we do have 4 reports on addictions. We have your tendency for addictions in general, cannabis addiction, cigarette addiction, or nicotine addiction, and alcohol addiction. However, I do look at those with people with addictions, but what I actually look at more is the hormones and neurotransmitters. Because to me, if I look at traditional treatments of addiction, 12-step programs and all that, what do they say? The core cause of all addictions is pain, is a feeling of emptiness inside, it's trauma, it's something like that. It's a form of pain. So addicts are not scoundrels or whatever they used to be paid to. They are people attempting to not be in pain. And I absolutely believe that.
That's an emotional pain, isn't it?
Well, it varies. So emotional, again, to me is not a scientific word enough. So what I have seen, like if I talk to someone and say, what is your favorite drug? And they were like, oh, I really loved amphetamines. Or I really loved alcohol. For me, it was cannabis. For me, it was tobacco. For me, it was whatever. I can tell what their neurochemical genetic balance is based on that. So for instance, someone who absolutely loves, amphetamines, that's probably someone with low dopamine. Someone who absolutely loves cannabis, that's someone with low endocannabinoids. Someone who absolutely loves opiates, that's someone with low levels of endorphins. Someone who absolutely loves alcohol or benzos, because they're both GABA agonists. That's like the main mechanism of action, although alcohol does other things. That's either someone with low GABA or high adrenaline, as we've talked about, or especially both. And then when I meet someone who has a genetic tendency to low oxytocin, oxytocin is the hormone that makes you feel fulfilled. So what did we just say? Addicts feel empty inside.
Yes, not satisfied.
Yes.
Something's wrong, something's missing. There's the vacuum there, like a hole to fill.
Exactly. So cortisol makes you feel like, I got to do something, nothing's ever enough. But oxytocin makes you feel everything is perfect as it is right now, I'm fulfilled. They're antagonistic to each other. So whenever I meet someone with a genetic tendency for high cortisol or low oxytocin, and especially if they have both, I've never before said to them, have you got addictive tendencies? And they say no. Like they always do.
Yeah.
And in fact, oxytocin is something that's available. Certain doctors will prescribe intranasal oxytocin off-label, and it's known to help with reduced cravings for cigarettes and for people who overeat. That's usually what it's used for, but I don't see actually why it isn't used for other addictions as well,
Yes.
potentially. And so, yes, to answer your question as quickly as possible, there absolutely is a biochemical basis, and I can even tell what drugs they're not going to be able to say no to, or really struggle to say no to, based on which of the hormones or neurochemicals are out of balance.
That is amazing. And I'm sure a lot of people listening and practitioners as well will take note, because it's a great tool to have when you're helping people get over, and it is a disease. Addiction is a disease.
Yes.
It's classified in the medical community as a disease.
Rightly so.
We need to treat it as something's out of balance in the body, and we have to find ways to rebalance it. And this to me seems like a good guideline or a roadmap.
Yeah, it's a starting place. And again, I'm not invalidating 12-step programs, rehab, any of the other things. I don't think that this replaces it. I think it's an essential first step again. And then you still do all the other stuff. But if you can also just help to improve dopamine, maybe with tyrosine, maybe with catuaba, maybe with, you know, any of these natural nutritional or herbal things, and then do the psychological treatment, the, you know, all the rest of it, then it's much more likely to actually work and stick.
You've got to calm the body, otherwise you're putting the cart before the horse. Yeah, you can't work on someone's mind if they're constantly stressed. They're not focusing. They're just all over the place, a bit ADHD-ish, right?
Yeah, in the case of dopamine, you've got to give people what they need. Otherwise, you know, there's this idea in addiction that, you know, once you're an alcoholic, you're also an alcoholic, right? For the rest of your life. You may not have drunk alcohol in 30 years, you're still an alcoholic. And that is technically true, because for how I interpret that is, what they mean by that is, if you're an alcoholic, you are someone with a neurochemical imbalance. That means you will always have that temptation and craving.
Always got the genes.
But what I disagree with is that you will always have the craving, because if you resolve the neurochemical imbalance, which is possible, then there's no need for you to have the craving.
It's learning how to manage, isn't it? Learning about your own body, its uniqueness, and knowing what to do and what not to do to stay on the balance beam.
Exactly. Yes.
So we'll finish.
I love your analogies.
I like to paint pictures because it makes it easy to understand. And thank you so much. I really appreciate this conversation. And perhaps in the future we could do it again. There's so much more to talk about.
I'd love to. Yeah, if we want to go deep dive into addiction or any of these topics, it'd be fun. Where
can people find you? What's your website?
If you go to geneticinsights.co, you can see this technology that we've talked about today. If you go to youtube.com/Elwin Robinson, my YouTube channel is there. And I'm sure if you Google Elwin Robinson addiction, that video I talked about will probably come up for people interested in that. And I also have a resource for people who want to feel younger called feelyounger.net.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you.
I hope you liked this conversation and will share it with others. Let me know what you thought about it in the comments below. If you want to listen to other Body Charge conversations, click like, subscribe, the bell icon, and click all notifications. Subscribe to our newsletter to get updates on blogs, podcasts, videos, and magnesium special offers at electromagnesium.com.au. Relax, recharge, and recover.